Welcome to Founders Tales. Today I'm joined by David Chang, who is a serial entrepreneur and currently the co-founder of Via AI. David, do you want to give everybody a quick intro to yourself and your current project?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks, Chris, for having me on. Love your mission around exposing some more of the underbelly of the startup land. And so I'm happy to dig into it. So quick background on me. I'm a startup entrepreneur. I've been doing this for about 25 years or so. I originally came up to the Boston area thinking that New England would be a fun place to spend 2 years, but 25 years later, still here. Had a bunch of early stage experiences. I was the first product manager at TripAdvisor. I ran a company that after our acquisition by PayPal, stuck around and did that for a little while. And then most recently had sold a company to E-Trade. And so been doing the startup thing for quite some time. And on top of that, have also been a pretty active angel investor. So I've done just over 100 angel investments over the past 15 years or so. And so it's given me a good perspective on both sides of the table.
Yeah, well, brilliant. Given your background, there's going to be a lot that we can delve into today. Do you want to just start by answering with your current business? What was the problem that kind of sparked the idea for the company?
Sure. We're super early. So we're 3 months in. The company's called Via AI. And the pain point that we saw was whenever anyone in business asked the question, can you introduce me to person X, or who do you know at company Y? There really wasn't a great answer. And even if you go to LinkedIn, you can kind of piece that together. But that was the biggest problem that we saw, and we saw it in multiple verticals. What we're focused on in the beginning is helping the go-to-market professional. So there's about 10 million of them in the US, figure out how to get warm introductions to new business. And especially in the early days of a business, your first couple of customers usually come from your network. And so we're building out some software that enables you to do that.
10 million, that's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. It is. And just a little bit of the reason why we chose that, it's a problem that sales folks face every single day. And it's also very frequent. So it happens 50, 60 times a day. And so it's not this infrequent pain. And because this pain point exists so sharply for this initial beachhead, we think it's a really good place to start our startup.
Yeah, working in sales, I can relate to what you're talking about there. Cool. So in terms of your learning curve, what would you say are the main things that you've learned over the years from being a founder?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, I'm a little bit of an accidental entrepreneur. Like, I worked at a really big company before coming up to the Boston area, and I thought I was going to rejoin a big company. But just as luck would have it, joined something that was on the earlier stages. And a couple of the things I've learned from those early days. So one is the velocity really matters. So how quickly you can get something done. It's not just running speed for speed's sake. It's around like intentional velocity and rapid iterations. Another thing that I'd learned in the early days was how strong relationships really make a difference. Like, I kind of thought, if you just join a company, you should just evaluate the company. It's really not the case. Like, it's so much about the team. And then, and maybe the last one is, at the early stages, you always have these near-death experiences. And so the very first time that you go through that, you think the world is coming to an end. But that's kind of when a lot of the interesting stuff happens. You figure out when you're super scrappy and you're right up against the wall, you figure out a solution. And so those near-death experiences is also something that I saw was pretty common around the early stages.
Yeah, necessity being the mother of all invention, etc.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And then moving on to funding then, what advice would you pass on to early stage founders that are looking to secure some funding at kind of pre-seed or maybe seed round stage?
Yeah, so this topic is very top of mind for two reasons. One is we just finished our own pre-seed raise. And so that was a $1.5 million pre-seed, a little bit oversubscribed. And so we were lucky to have that be the case. And then the other thing that's very relevant is that I'm actually headed over to MIT this evening to talk to a class of early stage founders about how to raise a pre-seed for their own startups. And I've ended up seeing that there's this playbook of very straightforward steps that founders can follow. And it's a 3-part playbook. I call it the ABC. So A, aim for a very tight target. This is where you want to be very selective around like the investors that you put on your target list. B, finding those believers. So in the very beginning, it's not about pitching. It's about socializing the idea, figuring out your message, figuring out who would ultimately be a good investor, but not actually doing the pitch. And then C, creating the FOMO. When you get to the point where you feel like you've got a thing and you feel like you've got the right set of investors, then you've got to run a very tight process around closing the round. And so that ABC is something that I've used in the past. We'll be sharing it tonight with the folks at MIT. And I've shared these same thoughts with folks kind of throughout the whole ecosystem, and it seems like it really works.
Yeah, fantastic. And when it comes to the actual pitching element of raising, is there any particular advice you'd pass on to people that are looking to pitch their business, their vision to potential investors?
Yeah, I think a lot of pitching advice is out there with respect to the contents of the pitch, like how to structure a pitch deck, what kind of materials that you need. And I find that so much, at least on the early stages, is around like telling the story. And so one big thing that I've seen separates really good storytelling and founders from the ones that struggle to get the message across is painting both the near term and the long term. One of the local VCs had shared this analogy a number of years back, but it really stuck with me, which was whenever he hears a pitch, he needs to understand both the summit and the base camp. And so the summit is that long-term idea. If everything goes right, what will this thing be? And kind of imagine a future where all these pains go away. And then the base camp is, what's the next realistic milestone? So convince me that you're on to something. And if you can't get to the base camp, then you're never going to get to the summit. And so those two things, you really got to be able to express to an investor. And the ones that do it really well can do it in a very short time frame and do it in such a way that's compelling, it's understandable, and it leaves the audience with this, oh, wow, this is really something.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier you're very involved when it comes to angel investing as well. So on top of what you've covered already, is there anything in particular that you personally look for to give you the confidence to invest in a founder or a founding team?
Yeah, I think this one, Chris, is probably a little bit more generic in the sense that many investors kind of look at the same 3 things. They call them 3 different things, or they may have slightly different names for them, but it ultimately falls into these 3 buckets of the pain point. Is it big enough? The product or the solution, is it something that's differentiated? And then the team. And so depending on if you're raising that very first pre-seed or your seed, Series A, Series B, it's some combination of those 3 things. And in the early days where there's so little data, so much is going to be qualitative. And so can you describe a big pain point, even if the data points aren't there? When it comes to your product or solution, can you describe like your thesis and why this is unique in the market? And then when it comes to the team, is there a track record? Can you express your ideas well? Is there a fit between this team and the problem that you're chasing after? And so those 3 things tend to be the same 3 that I hear time and time again from other investors. And ultimately, when I've done my angel investments, it's usually some framing of those 3. Even if it's not explicit, I'm probably scoring that in the back of my head. But those are the 3 that I end up using time and time again.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. And appreciate you guys are very early stage, but just in general, when it comes to scaling out, teams, scaling out an engineering org, etc. What advice would you pass on to other founders that are at that stage and they're looking to build out the team properly?
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen work really well is when you get the band back together. And so if you're a serial entrepreneur, or if you're a serial operator, or even if you were, some late joining employee, you tend to have this really strong network of people that you have already worked with and you already know their strengths and weaknesses. And so I found that the easiest way and the strongest way to tap into that talent base is your immediate network. And so even if it's been a while since you've worked with someone, you generally know like what their pros and cons are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so it does seem to be the element, especially in the very early days for a startup. You tap into that known network. It's sort of the thesis around first customers as well, but I've seen it play out very well on the hiring front.
Yeah, fantastic. And if you're evaluating somebody that's unknown to yourself, how would you try and spot that kind of startup DNA when you're interviewing or qualifying somebody?
Yeah, it's. I'm sure those that have worked with bigger companies and employees that have been at both small and big ones have seen what a wide range of DNA people have from startup and scrappy to very big company. There's two things that I typically look for. And so one is around when you kind of role play and ask them, well, how would you solve a particular problem? Like, walk me through how you would build. What do you need? Like, how long would it take? How much data do you need? And you very quickly see their thought process, right? And so startup DNA is around trying to find in a very short period of time some signal as to whether or not the thing is working. And so that first piece is around during the interview, being able to suss out whether or not someone has the velocity and all the things that we had just talked about. And then the other one around startup DNA is like when you look at their past experiences, look for things that would indicate that they would thrive well at the stage that you're at. And so some of it's just, you could just see on the resume, hey, I was employee number 2 at this thing, and then this is what I ended up building. And then even if they don't have that direct experience, like sometimes people come from larger companies, but I have found that even at a larger company, if they're in a group that moves like a startup, they actually still get those experiences. And so I think those are the two things that you're trying to suss out would really help you figure out whether or not someone would be a good fit for that particular startup.
Yeah, and as you said, depending on what stage you're up to, you may well be looking for a different type of profile to come into the team, right?
Yeah. And I've definitely seen people have these sweet spots for where they thrive the most. And some are the 0 to 1, some are the 1 to 10, others the 10 to 100. And it's kind of rare to have someone be so sort of, I guess, full stack. Maybe it's the wrong way to describe it, but like full stage, being able to scale from stage to stage to stage. They exist, but it's like a lot tougher. Most people have like a sweet spot where they're most comfortable, most skilled, have the right networks for it. And the quicker you can figure out like where that sweet spot is, the faster you'll be able to figure out whether or not that person's a fit.
Yeah, brilliant. And you mentioned that you initially came to Boston for 2 years, and you're still there now 25 years later. And I know you're personally very passionate about the Boston startup ecosystem. What would you say are the main advantages, frustrations when it comes to building in Boston versus maybe San Fran or New York?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a third rail, but it's yes. I've been here for a little while, and I'm a huge fan of building here, building both a life and a business here. I think one of the biggest strong points of the Boston area is around these very strong circles. We have these great universities and all this amazing talent that come through every single year, and a good portion of them end up staying here. And so there's really smart people. And then when they get plugged into these startup circles, which are generally around some industry, then there's this really strong virtuous cycle that kicks in. And so I've been a part of a few of those. They tend to exist in these clusters, right? And so life sciences is a cluster. My time in travel, there's like travel is a cluster, mobile and payments is a cluster. And so you find like that same talent go sort of get recirculated. So startup, exit. And I think that's one of the strongest parts about at least in general, the Boston tech scene. And then maybe on top of that, it does seem like overall that people are not only super willing to help, but there's also a very strong, what I've observed, like loyalty, maybe not the right way to describe it, but like this like endurance of I'm going to stay to solve this problem and not just sort of like flip off and go to the next thing if things don't quite work out. And so there does seem to be some real asset around that. And I guess on the flip side, I don't think the Boston tech scene is as vibrant as it once was. Maybe about 10 years ago, it seemed like there was a lot more density and velocity in multiple industries. And it feels like it's been somewhat concentrated. And I think maybe New York has been the flip. Maybe 10 years ago, it wasn't as strong. And it seems like right now they're really on the upswing in terms of attracting talent, the capital, the big companies, the pillar partners. And so I feel like there's some work to be done locally, but I'm happy to be here and do it.
Yeah. Okay. And on that note, how do you feel the Boston startup ecosystem can better support early stage founders?
I honestly, a lot of it is just breaking those circles, right? Because I think this ecosystem has been extremely open and very supportive. But when I talk to some new founders that maybe moved here for the first time, or if they came here for university, a common thing that I hear is that they don't know who to reach out to, and they find that it's really hard to break into those circles. And so whenever I hear that, I have to ask myself: is it an awareness problem? Is it an access problem? And overall, if we could find ways in this ecosystem to lower the friction between traveling within all these different circles and finding the super connectors within those circles, those are things that I think would go a long way to helping the early stage founder that's building in Boston.
Yeah, and on that note, are there any particular meetups, resources, mentors, etc., that you would put out to the audience as recommendations of yours?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question to answer because it really depends on the specific industry that you're in. A lot of early stage firms do, I think, a very good job of curating their communities, and many of them are multi-firm communities. And so, whether it's like a Founder's Edge or a Glasswing, a Pillar, an Underscore, these are all local VCs that devote significant time to creating this web of interconnectivity. And I just mentioned those four just because I'd recently been at events at every one of those, but there are many others. And so I think you'll find VC firms to be a good place for creating some of that community. There are definitely other nonprofit type organizations that do work around bridging some of those gaps. Like Startup Boston is one, and then maybe the last thing is because each of these verticals has a very different group that regularly meet, you'll find that they exist in these other little pockets. Like, so whether it's AI or robotics, each of them has like a really different cycle. And so if you're building in one of those verticals, then you've really got to spend some time to figure out like who those right connectors are, or who are the people that are most plugged in. And so I don't think it's just simply going to meetup.com and trying to figure out like what's happening in my neighborhood. And you've got to be a little bit more intentional around like why, like who you want to reach out to and reach out to them.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Thanks for that. And so moving on to some reflections and advice that you pass on to others. So if you could send one message back to yourself when you day one at TripAdvisor, what would that one message be if you could do that?
Oh man, day one at TripAdvisor for me was 21 years ago, so it's been quite some time. And a little bit of an aside, but when I had joined, I'd come from an enterprise software company where we would release every year, I would say, right? And their point releases, every quarter, and so that was just when you sold to the big behemoths like an AT&T or American Express, that's what you did. And so when I joined TripAdvisor that first week, the CEO, Steve Koffer, was like, okay, you join on Tuesday, we're ship this Friday, you got to get this, it doesn't matter what, doesn't matter how small, but you got to ship this thing live and you just got to go ahead and do it. And I was thinking, oh man, go figure, my luck, I joined the one day this year that we're shipping. And he's like, no, we do this every week. And so for me, going back, it was definitely like a velocity culture shock sort of thing. And I do think maybe if I abstract that a little bit, the lesson then would be around that, every one of those like little micro decisions, because it seems so momentous at the time, at the end of the day, it's like really almost everything's like a 51-49, right? Like you can go either way, but you just got to move forward. And I think in the very beginning, it was really hard for me to adjust to the velocity difference. And so advice back to day one would be around trying to think almost smaller, right? Like just what's a little bit of the problem that I can chip away at. Yeah,
brilliant. And what's the best piece of advice that you received from another founder over the years?
Yeah. So I one that comes to mind is my old boss, who his name's Chris Gardner. He's a VC now, but I worked for him at my very first startup coming out of business school. And then I actually worked for him at a second startup. And so he's been my boss at 2 different ones. And the piece of advice that he gave me was actually when I was not there, when I was thinking about starting my own company. And my perception was it was very risky. It's like I'm about to have a kid, I've got this full-time paying job. We just got acquired, so I might as well stick around for a little while. And the risk profile of going to an unfunded idea, which just seems so insurmountable. And his advice to me was, well, take a look at the actual risk. Like, what is the risk? And when he helped me think through this, the risk profile was not what I thought it was. Like, I could likely get another job if it didn't work out, right? Well, how long would it take? Okay, well, it's probably take this long. Do you have enough money to save up so that you can, weather the storm? It's like, yes. And so after thinking through that, his advice was around like seeing what that startup risk profile actually was. And it was not as daunting as I thought it was. And so it was very eye-opening for me when he'd shared that.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. And then finally, when it comes to dealing with the inevitable peaks and troughs of building out your own startup, is there anything that you personally do to, ride those waves a bit more easily, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, a big thing around is balance. I know it's kind of hard to do that when you're doing an early stage company. Balance around other things that are happening in your life. Some people do a really good job of putting them in different silos, right? Here's my personal life, here's my work life. I personally have had a difficult time doing that. And so they blend together really well. And so, or very often. And as a result, you can look at that either a pro or con, right? The con is, so there's no line, but the pro is you bring your personal life as part of your work life, and it all kind of supports one another. And so the thing that keeps me going and motivated through these highs and lows is I know there's going to be lows, right? And I know there's going to be highs, and you work through the lows to the highs. And what carries me through that is it's the commitment to the other people on the team. And so much of it is around the just not wanting to let someone else down who's you're sitting next to. And so that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, listen, look, thanks very much for joining today, David. I've really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing your pearls of wisdom. So thanks again, and best of luck to yourself and Via AI moving forward. I look forward to following your story.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you having me.
No problem. Pleasure.